Why should we learn history? Well, before we undertake to master any discipline, it's important that we understand what we hope to accomplish by our efforts. To what end do we learn to play the piano or study the German language or memorize a mathematical formula? Like any builder who starts with a set of architectural drawings before he even begins to break ground, our study of history must begin with the end in mind. When we understand why we are learning something, our educational goals become clear, our path there becomes certain, and the whole experience becomes much more delightful. Conversely, if we don't understand why we are learning something, the experience can be more of a drudgery and very unpleasant, leaving us wondering, why am I learning this? History is unfortunately one of these subjects that students often ask, why do I have to learn this? Why is it important for me to know about these people and these battles that happened hundreds of years ago in different countries? Why do I have to memorize these dates? So just like a builder needs to understand the blueprint before he begins to build, we have to understand what is the end purpose of our historical studies. We have to ask ourselves, why am I learning history? Now, if you ask most people why we should learn history, it's going to call to mind the saying of the philosopher George Santayana, who said, "Those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it." And there certainly is some truth to this saying. If we can't learn from the mistakes of the past, it's more likely that we're going to repeat them with each subsequent generation. Human nature being what it is, it requires a constant vigilance to prevent us from kind of degenerating back into the barbarities that have so frequently stained the pages of human history. But even if Santayana's quote is helpful as a proverb, I've always disliked it as kind of a comprehensive explanation of why we should learn history, because it turns the entirety of human civilization into something that we are condemned to repeat. It takes a very pessimistic, negative view of history, and certainly there are bad things about human history. There are things I would never want to revisit. I would never want to have dentistry done on me in the Middle Ages. I would die before I let a doctor touch me. But there's also many beautiful, sublime things about history that we should be glad to revisit, that we should be glad to repeat. I would be glad to repeat medieval architecture. Early 20th century German nationalism was ugly, but 19th century German art and music was beautiful. And frankly, it should be celebrated. So I prefer not to view history as something that dooms us, something that we constantly have to be working to escape or get away from. But beyond that, I also find Santayana's maxim just too utilitarian. Of course, the betterment of human society and making a more just and peaceful world is important. But isn't there a more intrinsic reason to learn history? Something that has to do more with the betterment of the human person and not necessarily some grand societal goal of improving the human race. Traditionally, history has been at the center of the so called liberal arts curriculum. Now, the liberal arts are those studies that exist to form the intellect and the character, as opposed to vocational or professional training that helps prepare us to make a buck in the world. Liberal comes from the Latin word libera, that means free, and the liberal arts are free in two senses. First, in the ancient Greco Roman context, they are what's proper to free men. But secondly, they are free in the sense that they are liberated from any utilitarian approach. We don't study literature or poetry or music because it's going to help us make a buck out there in the world. We study them because they form our character by ennobling our individual potential. They help teach us how to think, to explore our humanity. They make us more human. This is how the ancients viewed history. The Greeks even numbered history among the nine muses, and they assigned a muse of inspiration to the study of history, Clio, the proclaimer. So, through the study of history, we are enabled to transcend the workaday world and connect with the story of humanity in a way that is much bigger than ourselves. And the Roman writer Cicero really encapsulates this point. And I have a great quote here from Cicero. He says, "To be ignorant of what occurred before you were born is to remain always a child. For what is the worth of human life unless it is woven into the life of our ancestors by the record of history?" Understanding the things that came before our own life experience is essential not just for understanding the world we live in, but to understanding our own lives. If you think about a person who is unfortunate enough to suffer amnesia, uh, someone who can't remember where they've been doesn't know who they are. You erase the history, you erase the identity. Similarly, to the degree that we live without knowledge of where we've been, and that's whether as a species, culture, civilization, or nation, we're always going to remain somewhat stunted in our knowledge of ourselves. We're going to be, in some sense, in the words of Cicero, always a child. So, learning history helps us mature in our personhood. It helps us to become a more mature human person. And that should be exciting. There's no reason that needs to be a dull chore. The philosopher Aristotle said that one of the most fundamental characteristics of humanity is the desire for knowledge. He begins his metaphysics by saying, all men by nature desire to know. We are all curious beings, and the acquisition of knowledge should fill us with delight. And this is true of historical knowledge as well. History comes from a Greek word that means questioning. And this is because the ancient Greeks used to see monuments from cultures that came before them. They'd traveled, they'd see the pyramids or the ruins of Babylon, and they'd ask questions. They'd say, "Where did that come from? Who made that? How old is that? Why was that built?" It's just the expression of natural human curiosity as it pertains to the flow of time and understanding the things that were in this world before our own life experience. So I would say that the general big tent reason that we learn history is the enrichment of our own personhood through the exploration of the past. But underneath that big tent reason, there's room for lots of other secondary reasons to study history. We might want to understand the development of our own country better. We might want to learn about the history of our religion. We might want to learn the history behind a specific invention or technological innovation. We may want to study the history of a specific subgroup of people at a particular place and time, like Catholics in Japan in the 16th century or African slaves in America in the 1800s, as a means of broadening our cultural sensibilities. So there's many other secondary reasons that we can learn history that are valid, but unless we are connecting with that primary reason of enriching our personhood, maturing as a human being through broadening our understanding of the past, then it's always going to have a certain dullness, a certain drudgery that's going to leave us wondering, what value am I getting from learning this information? If you're just studying history to fulfill some prerequisite to check some state mandated boxes, or to just say I need this class to get into this program down the road, then it's going to be a lot less interesting than if you are coming at it from the perspective that we've been talking about. So it's not just about covering material. It is never just about covering the material, but engaging students' minds in a way that helps them connect with the grand tapestry of human history. And so, to the degree that we can keep that primary goal in mind, to that degree, our historical studies are going to be so much more rewarding. Now, because I never miss an opportunity to plug my own work, if you liked what you heard in this video, a lot of it is taken from my book, The Catholic Educator's Guide to Teaching History. It's a fantastic little book. It has a lot of practical information about teaching history, and it also has a lot of philosophical or theoretical concepts for you to dig your teeth into. I'm going to leave a link down in the description if you want to get a hold of this. So that's it. That's my video. I hope you liked it. Give a like, and if you want to give any suggestions for future videos, please leave that in the comments. And until next time, God bless you.